if this is a moment to get some ammunition for the next step, that forum. And so what I would like to do is then asking you what would be in your mind, what in your thinking, interesting building blocks for the science, complexity science program dedicated to the governance of Singapore. Maybe I'm saying a few things, what I picked up these 2 days. One, something about complexity science. First, there is an enormous lot of big, complex problems. The black swans and whatever you may call them. In Europe, we call them the grand challenges. Someone has said you should not talk too negative. You should give it. Well, we call them grand challenges. I think I'm not quite sure whether things are going better by that, but nevertheless. Then what I picked up is if you're going to do complexity science, forget the idea of analytic scientific approach. Take the stance of the decision maker. That's a very radical issue. And Douglas did not come up with quite a lot of critical questions. So easy it is not doing that. And but I picked up, if you're going to do it, complexity, and you want to be in the service of governance, then take the stance of the decision maker. Of course, always accepting and realizing that the decision maker is not God, but just taking the stance of the decision maker. That doesn't mean that you are not complying with the decision maker. My institute is doing the same. So most of my enemies are the decision makers, so to say. They don't like what I'm doing, but they cannot do without me. You know, that's kind of. But that's the reason is that my institute has not a problem with finding my results, bringing my results to Parliament or politicians, and the only reason is because I take the stance of a politician and a decision maker. That's the only reason that they want to listen to me. And it takes a responsibility. That's what I feel and they know. So that's one. That's what I picked up and I said, this is really interesting. And another one is, what the hell is the methodology of the complexity scientific approach? What is your toolbox? And that's for me a big question. And I saw, it came up ideas about modeling, big data, algorithms, agent-based modeling, you know, this kind of things. So this is a methodology which is not at all specific for complexity science. And the way we are doing it, we are talking about it, we are talking about complexity science which takes a stance in the frames of the 3 frames which we defined early in the morning. And we said, this is a new one. Well, quite a lot of universities and quite a lot of scientists are using this modeling. It's a booming business. So what makes the difference here? That's the question which we should put on the table, I think. Then there is another thing which come up several times. Complexity science has also to do quite a lot with designing. Not end stage issues. That's not in the, if you are going in complexity science, forget the idea of end stages which you want to achieve. It is finding the tipping points and make change. Be there and make change. Do not think in terms of end stages. And that's a kind of a message which I always also found back in the presentations on, say, the architects, the designers. That's an important thing, I would say. The role of designing in complexity research. One of the most important things is, what I heard here is, when we are talking about complexity science, then we are talking about interdisciplinarity, co-creation, co-production. And not only interdisciplinarity as a relationship between disciplines, but it's also with the outer world, with the stakeholders, the decision makers, citizens. The wisdom of the crowd. This is what we found here. Beautiful examples of the wisdom of the crowd. This is what we found in this presentation. The last one of Julia Watson, it was about the wisdom of the crowd. And scientists are coming in and they're flabbergasted by the wisdom of the crowd and the risks they are taking. These were the questions here. So, when this is the case, when complexity science is about this, interdisciplinarity, wisdom of the crowd, whatever, then my question would be, what the hell does it do in universities? And, you know, it's the last place to be for this kind of research. And another one is, you know, that when I'm taking the stance of a decision maker and going in and trying to be connected with that world, then this kind of research is also getting something activistic. It's research in action. It is always connected, and it's a dangerous kind of research. It's tricky. And it's not, this is so fine. In analytic research, you can sleep well. But this is not the kind of research you can sleep well with. And so that's what I picked up, and I said, oh my hell, this is, I would like to work in such a kind of an institute. My institute is doing a little bit like this, but this I would, that's nice. This is nice. And so that's what I picked up. And now the question is then, so what I said till now is, how do we position this kind of complexity research? To what does it belong, and what does it consist of? And this is a very important thing to start with. Without that, you cannot even fill in the subjects you want to do. So that's, for me, let me try to frame it that way. And now my question to you is, considering this is as a kind of a frame, what kind of subjects, what kind of modeling, building blocks we should take in consideration as here in the Singapore situation? Listening to Peter Ho and the ambassador with their big stories and the big problems, the grand challenges they're faced with. What are the building blocks? What should Jan Wouter write down, and Stephen should write down and say, yes, when we are starting, okay, we are starting in the university, the Technical University of Singapore. It's a good one. We can do it because you can do a lot there. So we are starting here. But what are the big issues with the building blocks we are starting with? Could you come up with some ideas on that, please? The mic, it's always the mic syndrome, man.
Thank you so much. So I'd like to make a couple of remarks and suggestions, just to keep the discussion. So the first thing that we have to realize is that, and this is going to be a very sobering thought, the first thing that we have to realize is there is no theory of complexity. It doesn't exist. So the next question is then, do we need it? I have no answer to that. But what we do need is to think about a theory of complexity, because otherwise it will just be a bunch of words that everybody can use in all kinds of different moments, and doesn't really mean anything.
What do you compare it with?
Let me just try to make my points, and then so there is no theory of complexity. But there is another thing. There is, like you mentioned, there is a methodology of complexity. There is actually this whole toolbox. I think you were showing that, the toolbox of methods. But if you don't have a concept of what you're going to do with your tools, you might end up with a building that's actually not doing what you want it to do. So we need this theory of complexity. And I think answering one of your remarks would be that theory probably has to come partly also from the academia. So that's where the universities come in. So that was actually defending my own position here. So, but this is the thing we have to really, so I want to repeat this. There is no theory of complexity. It's not there, but we need it in order to understand how we're going to apply methods. Otherwise we're like, blind watchmaker. So, but there is another thing, and it's really important, and I think that's what's happening here in Singapore, that is that what we realize is that the methods for complexity require participatory components. And that sets it really apart from anything else. You know, you can call it holistic, you can call it system thinking, don't care. But the bottom line is it is a participatory system. And slowly, like Rob was saying, that we have new methods coming up that actually allow us to capture these kind of participatory aspects. And the unique thing that I'm observing, looking at initiatives like this all over the world, is that in Singapore there is actually a debate between the government and this kind of sciences. That's not happening in many. It's rarely happening in other places of the world. So I think Singapore really has a big step here. So the question is more, how can we keep that edge here in Singapore rather than how we can start it, because it's already happening. So what we need to think of, and that's actually what I'd like to bring to the table, is we need to think of let's call it a theory of a participatory set of methods that we can, with which we can really quantify and reason what we're doing. Otherwise, we will be like I said, blind watchmakers.
Okay. Okay. Other remarks? Yeah, please. Sander van der Leeuw.
I have been puzzled by this use of this term decision maker. I once had
building blocks, I'm asking for.
I will get there, okay?
Okay.
I have, at one point in a project where I was supposed to create a complex systems model, looked for the decision maker I was going to do this for. I looked for a half a year and I never found one. I would propose as a building block to actually take the decision making here in itself as a complex system and try and understand that and improve that understanding. I realize that that is a politically difficult issue, but I do believe it is fundamental if you want to go ahead here.
Political decision making as a part of a complexity system, and take it in consideration whatever you do. That's it. Yeah, please.
Good morning. I'm aware that I'm talking to social scientists here, physical scientists, as well as policymakers, but we all share a common humanity, and that's what's brought us here together to address this question in Singapore. A building block that I would like to propose that would add to the theories that I'm sure our workshop will eventually lead to, complexity theories, is the collection of data. I would like to propose that perhaps we can set out a framework and set out in motion and set out resources to start collecting data on the socio-ecology in Singapore, and feed this into whatever future models that will come up to calibrate it. And personally, as I've shared quite a few times, I do see a tragedy happening in Singapore. And I would subtitle it the tragedy of an overcooked steak, or an overcut diamond, or an overpainted Monet. But because we are in a life situation, it is a wicked problem. I would, from an optimist point of view, call it an unfolding adventure, yeah, as opposed to a wicked problem. In 100 years' time, would Singapore be I call it the jewel that it is today? Even though an optimist, I actually have my serious doubts. And I would like to just suggest that we can collect the data now and track where we're going. All phyla, that means from microbes to trees to people around very stable ecosystems like forests, which I live next to, and then use the data to help educate or shape future island city-states.
Okay.
That will pop up, around the world, like Singapore, so that they can avert our overcooked steak.
We had one theory of complexity, and it's with specific attention to participatory methods and so on and so on. We had one on what was yours?
decision-making as a complex system in itself as it works out here, and that relates mainly to the ambassador's talk.
You're right. And then we have here the data, the data
Collection.
the data when we have consider Singapore as an ecological system, or then you need data. And if whatever you do, you need data. That's what, and you're very pessimistic, but that's the nature of Singaporean citizens. The ambassador says.
No.
Oh.
But
Okay.
I'm being realistic.
Okay. Please.
What another element that I would add into that part is, again, bringing together academics and scientists and the actual community, and in what space can you actually bring them in? So could you create, could you create a kind of lab within that space that will allow you to bring practitioners from various places around Singapore, whether it's government or communities, and these kind of projects can be designed in different ways for experiential learning and helping them to develop their own tools and frameworks in what would work for them to deal with complex environments.
Create labs. That's what you were saying.
Yes, but experiential labs. So
Yeah,
the idea is
yeah.
to bring people from the outside to actually participate in the development process,
Yeah.
not scientists developing
Yeah.
tools for
Yeah.
practitioners.
Okay. Yeah. Please.
So let me just say that living in Washington for 20 years and dealing with policymakers on a regular basis, Washington is its own kind of city-state in the sense that it's policy not just for the city of Washington, but policy for a broader world. And it is my experience that there are people in government who are early adopters of new ideas, new methodologies, new thinking. And there are other people in government who are very recalcitrant and are going to be very conservative and not want to do anything different than they've always done in the past. So it is the case that if in fact you can find a killer app of a complexity, say rendered idea or methodology or something, which a specific policymaker can use and wants, then kind of like, all bets are off, hold on to your hat. I mean, they're going to run with it and do something spectacular. And let me give you a very concrete example. So in the wake of 9/11, what actually happened in the U.S. government was the question arose as to what should the U.S. government do? How should the U.S. government prepare for, say, weapons-grade smallpox being put in the New York subway or the Washington subway? And the answer, given by traditional models, by mathematical models, differential equation models, of the kind Peter knows well, SIR, SIS type models, was you basically have to, if in fact that event happened, you have to basically vaccinate an entire city. And when you vaccinate an entire city, means you have to have 10 million, 20 million, 30 million vaccines available. 1 in 10,000 people get a disfiguring side effect from that vaccine. You need to have all kinds of contingency plans for those people. Make a long story short, the White House basically said in October of 9/11, or October of 11, or October of 2001, they said, we need to have a better method to figure out who gets the vaccine. Now, field epidemiologists, who are, I would maybe call them complexity scientists who speak complexity science without knowing that they're complexity scientists, because they actually deal with stuff on the ground and complexes on the ground. Those field epidemiologists said, look, we know how to deal with it. We have to do trace vaccination. And as you don't vaccinate the entire city of New York, you vaccinate only the people who are in the subway and the people who were next to the people in the subway and people who are family members, et cetera, et cetera. This trace vaccination. Now that involves maybe 5% or 10% as much vaccination as the whole city. The trouble is there's no model for that. There's no way to model that. And so the people at the CDC said, well, we can try to build, and they didn't even have the terminology, so we can try to build a large-scale stochastic network simulation. Well, we said, you mean an age-based model, right? And so at that point, the White House, to their credit, said, NIH, take $50 million and figure out the right tools for doing this. And so back to Peter's point, there's no general theory of complex systems, because complex systems are everything, so you can't have a theory of everything. But in particular domains, like this trace vaccination paradigm, you can build up computational tools, specialized tools, and then you can, now you have the reverse case. Everything we've been talking about for the last couple of days, it seems to me, is the how to get policymakers to buy into, to be consumers of, to demand your product, demand your result.
Okay.
And now I'm saying there's if you can get the reverse to happen, then all bets are off. If you can get the policymaker to say, the researcher, give me tools to help me make a decision, At that point, then it's a different world.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, please.
So the ambassador's question to us this morning was, how does the government respond to a desire to participate? And I wanted to propose that we've heard some things which contribute to an answer here. Peter Brathen yesterday put out the paradox of control. The more control you retain, the less you actually have. And Sander van der Leeuw emphasized the importance of information flows. And I think these things come together. And understood within the proposals for experiential learning and participatory processes, these push towards something which is essentially a functioning public sphere in which bottom-up voices are allowed to be heard. And it's anything but a killer app for proposing or finding solutions, but it's kind of an alternative pathway which essentially has to exist for that possibility to be there for Subox to be created.
Okay. Please.
So I want to build on Robert's point is that we're exploring the cutting edge of complexity and governance and policy, etc. And that's certainly well beyond science at this point. It's important to do, but if you're going to be successful and create a culture of complexity, you really need to get those bases in where you can have success. So indeed. And there are lots of areas that actually really solve problems. So epidemiology, traffic, logistics, military. So, at least make sure that there are a bunch of those research projects that are there that deliver real goods. And that then can be a platform for having these more esoteric discussions and more exploratory things. But if you don't have those foundational bits that deliver the goods, you don't have the credibility. It'll seem like a sort of an interesting philosophical bit of academia.
So you're saying when you're starting here, when you're going to start with doing complexity research, do it on subjects where they in fact are waiting for you, and you can contribute to solving their problems.
I'm saying do both because it gives
I
you the
know,
license to think.
but it was the building block. You said you've got to be precise on the selection of your themes, and you've got to have success here, and you've got to create your own demands. That's what both of you are saying. This is very important when you're not doing that and you're going in abstracts and so on the theory of complexity, how necessary it is. But when you are not doing this, then you'll die in beauty or something like that.
I think what you were saying is that you have to make use of the success stories that are already there and build from that. So is that correct?
Yeah, it's to get literally a license to think. You need to, in our society, and for very good reason, you need to deliver real value in order to have the license to do more esoteric things. And the good thing is that there's enough examples and cases around the world, and the epidemiology is clearly one, but traffic and logistics, genetic algorithms for, there's some stuff that's incredibly exciting and delivers real economic value and practice to policymakers, and you need those foundations in order to be able to do them more.
Okay. So.
I'm glad the subject of traffic has been brought up.
Okay, now you're home.
So let's talk about something a little bit more concrete. Singapore is one of the earliest cities to start what we call the area licensing scheme, which stops traffic from going into the center area and asks for the payment of a toll or a fee to go in. And this has evolved over the years, together with car ownership constraints. And we've had extreme examples of oscillations between trying to control very strictly the car-owning population, so much so that today the policy is that the car population is only allowed to increase 0.5% a year. And when you have a population increase of 2% a year, you can see that is regressing in terms of the car ownership ratio. and then coupled with the influx of well-off foreigners. I mean, we have quite a lot of millionaires in Singapore. This creates a rich-poor divide, which causes a lot of social unhappiness. And on the other hand,
What is your building block then? You
the
want
building
to
block is the transportation system. How to
start with that, you're saying?
yes,
Because it's
as a building block
yeah.
to demonstrate some results.
But
and
isn't it a holy cow?
it is not a holy cow.
Okay.
It is something, in fact, that touches everybody's lives.
Okay.
And I don't think there's a dogmatic view in the government in terms of which way to do it. It's just that they haven't found the balance and
Okay.
don't know how to do it.
Okay.
And I think this is an open problem that complexity could play a role.
Thank you.
So maybe a brief reaction to that. I think that's an excellent idea. In Amsterdam, we have a large program just started, which is called SimCity.
Yeah.
And actually, I'm leading that, and that's a program where we want to actually simulate, parts of the city, and we just start with traffic because that's pretty well understood, even though it's complex. And there's a lot of data that we can actually tap into. And we know a lot about social behavior that goes with that. So it actually is a very good starting point from which you can develop ideas about the influence of certain policies. And Singapore is pretty unique because you can really get data up to minutes of the 24,000 taxis that are driving around.
Yeah.
And you can get this kind of things that was just mentioned, that about the behavioral aspects of policies that you implement. So I think it's an excellent idea.
Okay.
Not only that,
I think we have a problem now.
Well,
he's-
let me just add to.
No, but
what
he's
Jan
making a
has said.
problem. He's saying stop. And
No,
now he's saying let him talk. So
Yes.
my leadership, you're disputing my leadership here.
Well, you're both Jan, so it is a Jan who is saying that we should do this. The other thing about Singapore is we have a history since 1975 or so, which is a long time in terms of the car population, the congestion status, the income levels, the population mix, all kinds of data over 40 years or so of all the different attempts to control the car population and control the transportation system, including the public transport build-up. So it's a rich treasure trove of data that I think can be used to discover some inherent relationships. I think that there's
No,
plenty
it's
of
fine.
room there.
Yeah. Okay. But but exactly. That's what you caused. You did it. It's not my fault. You did it. Please.
So if I can make just one point about it, I think this is an excellent example where Singapore could use existing complexity ideas to improve public policy in this local environment. Now, a different and more complicated, a harder question is there a domain which so far the rest of the world has not adopted where complexity tools could in fact be useful, which Singapore would have some comparative advantage in? Now, I have a recent paper where I say there are 3.5 successes of complexity tools in the public policy sector, as Rolanda said, traffic, combat, and epidemiology. But I think that there's emerging idea, though, that within finance, you could also do a lot. And this is where Singapore maybe also has comparative advantage.
Yeah.
But no one has really done much yet with finance.
Okay. Finance. Another one. Okay. Peter. And then we are stopping. Yeah, I think we are doing it.
Just one comment, because I think these types of quick wins where you can transport is a really good idea. The other thing is that when you're a practitioner, you learn to listen to what is your customer saying. We had the ambassador here telling us, this is what I need. So let's start that dialogue. She said, I need to know how we transition a democracy from what we have to normal democracy. I don't have the answer for it, but I think what we should say is to say, how do we get in a dialogue to say, these are the 6 challenges, can we contribute? And she actually told us.
And
It's
you are
what we would call a buying signal in the
You're
commercial.
suggesting find a way to contribute to
Well, she
from
actually
complexity to in organizing and facilitating
She-
that dialogue.
put it more eloquent than I can ever
Okay.
do. But she said one thing. She said we need to transition from what we have to what she called the normal democracy. That is perhaps a challenge that could be unique for Singapore, and it could mean a lot for the understanding of participation in
right.
other parts of the world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
I think that what is interesting that you could provide a kind of contained, safe space for that to happen and
Okay,
play
a lot.
around with those things. That is
Yeah, okay. Good. Yeah.
So here's a different perspective. A lot of the examples that we've seen over the last 2 days show that part of complexity are self-organizing systems. And I think there's an incredible degree of scientific hubris in this room if we fail to recognize that societies are self-organizing. So let's not look just at the problem space, let's look at the solution space. And what are the examples within Singapore or elsewhere where we have had self-organization, just like we have these other areas of self-organization. And I'll throw this out, but it might not be it. But if you've seen interracial marriages increase, what's that been a complexity solution to? And how would you reconstruct the problem from the solution? And what would that tell you?
Okay, thank you very much. That's an interesting one. Yeah. No. I think, yeah, it's a little bit of pity. Yeah? Now the music is coming. So no, we have got to stop now because the next step has been done it will be start now, isn't it? Yeah. Okay, then we stop. Thank you very much for your contribution. And what you have, bring it to Jan.